Does success elude you? We're told that if we work hard, that we'll succeed. Study hard, get into a great school, get a great job, and we'll be successful. But this is a lie. Matter of fact, this will almost entirely guarantee that you become mediocre. Here's some myths about success. We're told that if we pursue our passion, that we'll succeed. Do what you love and success will follow, right? Well, how do you explain all those artists and actors who are passionate about their art but will never become famous? And YouTube is full of them. Or the one about putting in 10,000 hours. Well, how do you explain all those kids, millions of kids who play soccer or some other sports for 10, 15 years, yet they will never make pro or go to the Olympics? Or the one about there's something special about you. Everyone thinks that you're the smartest, come from a great pedigree. Well, that was certainly the case for Samuel Langley. He was a professor, secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, member of high society, and even received significant funding to develop a piloted airplane. Yet he was beaten by the Wright brothers, who had no pedigree, no connections, no money. Malcolm Gladwell attributes success to other hidden variables, such as the year that you were born, your family upbringing, and even luck. Well, that's great, but what about everyone else who weren't born in that year or didn't have those favorable circumstances? There is, however, a way to realize your goals, and I'm a living proof. What I've realized is that from my experience, that anyone striving to succeed, regardless of who or where you are in life, that the secret to success is not 10,000 hours or being born into the right family or being as smart as Albert Einstein. It's a secret that I call strive. It's about doing the things that's most uncomfortable, that forces you to create new spheres of influence and power. Most people look at me and assume that I come from a great background. That's far from the truth. I grew up in Korea into poverty. I didn't have a father. My mother had less than fourth grade education. And I still remember after the rice harvest, we would go out to the field to glean, picking up the rice that fell into the ground. And from month to month, we borrow from neighbors to survive. And at school, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get better than C's because apparently I was copying from the wrong kid. Well, it was during this volatile time called the Gwangju Democratic Movement in South Korea in the 80s that my mother decided to immigrate us to the US. But a few years after we immigrated, she had a mental breakdown, and then I was placed into foster care. And since the age of 13, I moved from home to home. I had absolutely no one. And I literally should have ended up as a nobody. Yet I'm a living proof of the concept of strive, that when we do the things that's most uncomfortable, we create incredible success. The problem is that most of us are on autopilot. Day in and day out, our habits anchor us down. We want success, but yet it eludes us. In order to achieve success, we first have to disrupt ourselves. Do you know how to build muscle? In order to build muscle, you have to actually tear the muscle fibers apart in order to build new ones. And that's what effectively bodybuilders do to disrupt themselves. My mother and I were hated by her relatives for her decision to marry my father. And when I turned 3, my mother asked my father to leave. And I grew up without a father. And it left a big hole in my heart. And back in the 70s in Korea, not having a father was not okay. And people literally treated me as if I was a bastard. Well, fast forward, I was in the 5th grade in the States. When one day I was taken out of class by a school counselor. I didn't know what was going on. Then I was taken to the police station. No one explained anything to me. Until hours later, when a social worker came and finally explained that my mother was no longer capable of caring for me. Then she began to contact all 4 of my uncles and aunts. And one by one, they refused to take me in. I was devastated. Here I was, grew up in poverty, didn't have a father or even a sibling, and now I've been turned down by my own relatives. My world fell apart. And just when everything seemed completely bleak and hopeless, my first foster parents introduced me to God. Most of my life, I lived behind a mask, a facade. I'm great. I'm perfect, actually. But then I went to college and graduate school, and I started to experience these panic attacks and depression. And I didn't know what was going on. Then I started my career. I was driven. I wanted success. But yet, something was holding me back. You see, I was broken. I was permanently damaged. My poor wife, she had no idea what she had signed up for when she married me. And I still remember when our kids were young, my wife would say, I'm dealing with a selfish, stubborn child. And of course, I would say, hon, come on, be easy on the kids. She said, no, I was talking about you. I'm not very good at smiling, and it takes a little bit of effort. And sometimes I look a little angry. Well, one day my daughter comes up to me and says, Dad, did I do something wrong? I said, no, sweetheart, no, of course not. It's your brother. It was after my first venture failure that I realized I needed to do something different. Something was holding me back. I needed to heal. I spent 3 years in counseling to emerge from that process to become a different person. And that was my first major disruption. My second major disruption came when I turned 40. By then, I had achieved a lot. But I was still not experiencing that wild, incredible success that I always wanted. And it dawned on me. In all my past ventures, it was about the idea, the product, the team, but nowhere in the picture was me. I never wanted to be in the limelight. I shied away from public attention. I was deathly afraid of sharing anything personal. I wanted to remain anonymous. And that's when I decided to disrupt myself again. I work with a physical therapist to improve my speaking articulation. I work with a physical therapist to improve my neck and posture. And I joined Toastmasters so I can become a public speaker. And I aggressively submitted papers to speak at conferences. And every step of the way was incredibly uncomfortable, but earned. No one gave me a free ticket. Today, I work with nations and sovereignties and NGOs, such as the European Commission, and many countries around the world. But until I became intentional about disrupting myself, the success that I always wanted was not attainable. I am where I am today because I did these things that took me way outside of my comfort zone. One of the most important aspects of disrupting yourself is abandoning your comfort zone. Our natural tendency is to stay in our comfort zone where it's safe and familiar. My work in the Internet of Things and the Fourth Industrial Revolution has garnered global attention. And as I traveled the world speaking on disruptive technologies, something began to emerge. In many of these regions, they're struggling to adapt to exponential technologies and to use these technologies to transform their economies. Well, I decided to do something incredibly hard. I decided to go completely outside of my comfort zone and create a venture capital firm to transform nations. Yes, transform nations. Amyx Ventures works with nations to create sustainable economic growth through investment in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we work with the local ecosystem to address their knowledge and skill gaps, to steward the IP to commercialization, and to fund those startups, and to help them build international teams, and to give them access to global markets. Now, frankly, it would have been a lot easier to just start a global funds and invest into promising startups in Silicon Valley. But I have chosen to do something that's incredibly uncomfortable because how are we going to transform the world? Human history is full of failed government and military interventions. How do you begin to stabilize a country or a region? It's not with guns, sanctions, government aid. Research indicates that only through sustainable economic growth can we begin to address and tackle difficult geopolitical, human rights, and income inequality issues. Do you know how South Korea went from being one of the poorest nations in the world to becoming an OECD G20 nation in less than 50 years? By doing the things that was most uncomfortable as a nation to transform a country. In the 1980s, made in Korea meant that it was cheap quality. Well, they weren't satisfied. They wanted more. They kept pushing themselves to move up the value-add curve. And today, they are a world leader in consumer electronics and semiconductors. You see, many countries around the world are stuck in low-value commodity products and services. For example, German automakers leverage Czech Republic to assemble auto parts. Why? Because of lower wage. But what's going to happen to Czech Republic as automakers replace more humans with more robots? And that's why we're working with the local ecosystem to take the advanced research from universities and to commercialize them into Industry 4.0 startups. Colombia has been hit hard by fallen commodity prices. And this is a critical juncture for Colombia, as they're just coming out of the peace agreements and they're looking to join the OECD. Yet, less than 0.2% of their GDP is spent on innovation. And that's why we're working with the local companies and industries to increase their human capital and IP-driven innovation to modernize their oil and gas, mining, and manufacturing industries. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has been hit hard by low oil prices. Moreover, they recognize that the oil reserve will run out in 25 years. Unless they start taking action today to shift away from oil to non-oil industries, their country is at great risk. As part of the National Transformation Plan, we're working with them to take their expertise in oil and gas and to create new IPs, new patents, and new startups to create new industries. Every step of this journey is incredibly uncomfortable for the nations and the people. But unless they take these uncomfortable steps to transform themselves, they're going to be left behind, leading to social unrest, conflict, and regional destabilization. But just because you took a few risks doesn't mean that success suddenly shows up. It takes years of investing and persevering, even when others, and sometimes you, doubt yourself. Transforming a nation doesn't happen overnight. And perhaps one of the hardest aspects of transforming a nation is about the mindset. How the local citizens view the notion of risk and failure. Many young people around the world steer clear away from startups because they're afraid of failing. Whereas in Silicon Valley, we celebrate failures because it's a stepping stone to success. Many older people are afraid of change. Innovation is seen as risky, untested. So they hold dearly onto what they know, not recognizing that the industries of today will become obsolete, and that they'll be left behind. Changing mindset will take time. Success requires resolve. And when we fall, we need to get back up, and again, and again. Regardless how you choose to define success, just raise your hand if you want more success out of life. Great. Most of us want more success out of life for ourselves, for our kids, for a greater purpose. But how are you going to make an impact in the world if you keep on spinning the same circle, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? I challenge you to the things that's most uncomfortable for you. You have the opportunity to realize great success, and it's available to everyone.